Hello everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Sergey Shukov. I did one presentation before lunch just downstairs. I'm an engineer at Jahia Solutions Group. I will present today what we actually did with the Spring Webflow in Jahia 7. So how we integrated it, why we integrated it, what can be done with it, and I will demo a couple of things. This is me. I'm actually part of Jahia since back in 2007. I'm mostly working with the web projects since the very beginning, so I'm really fond of web project development and in external framework integration services, and the Spring and Spring MVC, I would say, yeah, quite a key to success in the external integration. I would like to quickly say why we took Spring Webflow. Maybe a short description of what it is for someone who doesn't know how it is integrated in Jahia. We'll show a couple of simplified examples with it, so just to understand the basic ideas of Webflow, and maybe show or tell a bit how it is used in Jahia. And finally, I will summarize it and say what it could be used for, what it is best suited for in Jahia especially. So, the main drivers actually for going this direction were that some customers, quite a lot, were complaining that the standard tools or standard actions, templates and mechanism in Jahia with the rendering were not capable of doing complex things like step-by-step wizards or complex validation with going back, automatic data validation, and so on. So we already know it that we need to do something. And the second one is also really important one. In Jahia 7 we did refactor our old Jahia administration part, this server and site administration, if anyone knows this. And for this one, because a couple of screens in Jahia administration are really complex from the workflow point of view, like user management, group management, or even project management is not so trivial. We thought that it's the good chance to do it now. The main criteria for doing something or for selecting something was that it somehow seamlessly integrate into Jahia rendering system, because we doesn't want to integrate something which has completely different notions or completely different handling. It should, of course, support automatic data binding and form processing. There was a need for custom or complex validation, which was not covered by default, and it should do something like the page navigation back and forth without losing the data, and so on. And it should be still easy to learn and use. So that is where actually the Spring Webflow comes into play, because it covered our goals, or at least the requirements we stated before. It comes also from the Spring landscape. It's nothing. It's not a rocket science. It's supposed the same bin definitions. It integrates seamlessly in this area, the MVC, the type converters, binding, and so on. And it's just a special control layer on the top of Spring MVC. So what we did actually, we finally came to the content views. We use views in Jahia to render content in some context, which are based actually on the Webflow. Maybe a couple of words what the Spring Webflow is. I have just stated here the statement from the site, because I do not want to invent my own definitions. So it's actually the framework which builds on the Spring MVC, implements the flows, like a sequence of steps to complete the user-defined business actions. A brief review of the history. It started in 2004 by one Belgian engineer, and the first release was in October 2006, and we are using the latest one, which was released last year. the basic, just a question, is any one of you familiar with Spring Webflow, or at least knows some concepts or used it? Okay. Okay, I will briefly tell you in a couple of words what it is and what it introduces. So it introduces the flow concept. The flow is like a processing of actions. It extends the well-known application scopes, like, you know, with the GSP development, you have the page scope, the request scope, and the application scope. This one introduces on top also some special, like Flash, Flow, and Conversation. It just allows you to keep the data alive for a particular, let's say, session or course of interaction, which does not require you to somehow manage the data after the next request and so on. The essential language elements, I mean the definition language elements are actually the flow. There are subflows. You can define subflows. There are view states, transitions between them, then start and end actions. And between them and also on rendering of actions, of states, sorry, you could evaluate some code, or you can execute various actions. This is a simplified example of what can be done with it. I will quickly mention the main concepts in Jahia with regard to templating, just to remind you. The rendering concepts in Jahia, so the content node, which we render in a page, let's say, when the request comes, need to have a template, which is a full page view. Then each template defines some areas. Each one of them can contain also nodes with special views in them. So a content node is rendered, it generates the output using some special view. View, in our point of view, is a script which can be executed to produce the output, HTML output, JSON output, or any other kind of output. I won't go into details on this page. This is just showing the basic structure, how it can be done. So on the example of the home page, which is using the home page template, which is based on the base template, and so on. So. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. The request rendering flow begins with the URL, which is done for some particular node. We look up the template name, the template for the corresponding node. Then we begin with the processing. So we iterate over all the areas which are defined in the template, and then we aggregate the output of the areas producing the whole HTML page or the whole JSON page or the whole RSS page. The rendering process of the area is a bit similar. So we look up the node, which corresponds to an area. We resolve the view script, we execute it, we produce the output, we aggregate it back. So as an example of a simple news item, in Jahia you can have multiple views. So depending on the context or on the need, you can create particular views to display it in one or another context. So for example, this is a link view. The names are arbitrary, so you can choose whatever you want. This is a default view. This is a large view, which also includes the image. There can be multiple views for the same content node. As to the types of the views, we distinguish between GSPs, which are most common in Jahia. They are executed using the request dispatcher. We distinguish between the dynamic languages views, scripting, which are based on GSR 223, which is scripting for Java platform, I guess, which include Velocity, Groovy, FreeMarker, and so on. They are executed by Script Engine Manager. And here comes the next one, which we actually introduce. This is the Webflow. It is actually, in the sense, not quite different. It's also based on, for example, the GSPs as the view scripts. But it, at the top, at the beginning, it dispatches to a dedicated flow controller, which handles all the Webflow logic. So what actually we do with the web flows in modules, let's say, with the Webflow views? We automatically detect them, we register, we unregister them. When the module stops, there is a special flow definition registry for each flow in the Spring Webflow. We do a proper dispatching, the URL mappings, the handling, the view resolution, even the internationalization support, and so on. What is needed from your side or from the side of integrator who is willing to use this kind of flows? So, if you know, the basic view in Jahia is just a, here we do not have a GSP. A flow-based view is a folder because it contains multiple resources. It just has like an extension. It ends with .flow. Just to mention that the notation is quite similar. You have the node type without the namespace. You have the view name, and then here usually we actually have the extension GSP or Groovy or something. Here we have a flow just to indicate that this view is using the Spring Webflow behind. So in order to enable support for views, you just need a Spring file in your module. It could be even empty. It just needs to signal Jahia that the module contains the Spring Webflow definitions, because it automatically injects some data and creates registries. As I said, there should be a folder which is corresponding to a view. There is a flow definition file which is always flow.xml without any flexibility. It's just like this. So, and the flow, each flow contains like the view states. For each view state, you can have a GSP script behind. You can define action handlers, the Java classes. You can define model classes, some validation, resources, and so on. I will try to show a simple example, a really simplified one, just to give you an idea how it's working and what it's doing. So this is actually a simple job application. Like there are job announcements and you apply for a job, and then someone reviews your application by just pressing accept, reject, or similar. So the definition of the flow is really simple. It contains several screens, just starting from the entering the personal data, then some additional stuff, submitting the application itself, summary, and final state, and cancel is also a global state. You can cancel from any step, actually. The example features the automatic form binding. It means that we bind a Java object behind the field, so it's automatically populated and kept during the flow execution. It also features file upload. I will just show how simple it is to specify the file upload with Spring Webflow. And it also features the GSR 303 validation, which I guess specification is called bin validation. It allows you to use for example, annotations-based validation, which you can define your model. You can create custom validators quite easily, and so on. And the second flow is about the reviewing the application itself. It's just a really simple case of showing the overview details, so this drill down use case. The model is publicly available on the GitHub, so if you would like to take a look, you could. I can show you the source code of the module, which is pretty simple. I can just use the studio to show it to you. It uses the GNT job object, just for simplicity, and defines a couple of, these are the normal views, which are GSP based, and these are two views which I've created using the Webflow. So one is apply, and one is the review, which for two different use cases. So the flow definition is just It's pretty straightforward definition. I have not seen a lot of complexity with it, so you can define just by reading the documentation or looking at the example. So it's just defining the view states, transitions between them, and perhaps some actions which you could execute on transition or on rendering. It has of course some advanced concepts which you can use, but for our example it's not needed so far. I will just show this simple demo just to give you an idea what is the form. So we have a page with some job applications, simple one. But we are still searching for engineers in Jahia, so you can apply. Yeah. It features some validation where you have some required fields, some, I guess, even some mail format, proper rendering. I cannot type with one hand. So, for the second screen is just some additional questions. On this step, you can choose the application itself, maybe some cover letter. It's also using the validation for the my time of the file, so you can define that this file should be a PDF or so on. It's just an example of how simple the validation implementation is. I can show you after. I guess I already have the submission with this name. I will just change it. So, this is the definition of the first flow, actually, the application for the job. The second one is not much complex. We just use the user which has more permissions to review the application and just see a list of submissions. It's just a classical overview and details page with some actions, let's say accept and so on. I would just like to show you how the validation is defined, because it's quite interesting and could be really simple to implement. I will show it in the studio. So in the flow definition, you can see that there is this class is defined as a model, because, for example, it's used as the model between the states. So this one is actually keeping the data between the states, and it is used for automatic binding of values. It defines some fields like the first name, last name, email, and so on. The fields we saw in the screens of the flow. I would just like to mention a couple of things. Like I said, for the file upload, you just define a field as a type uploaded file, and it gets automatically binded by Spring. So you do not need to handle this multi-part things, upload, and so on. It's just done automatically. The second feature which I said was the GSR 303 validation. So these annotations which are coming from JavaX validation constraints and so on. They're really simple to use. So you define the field as mandatory. You define the field as email format. It has the pattern validation for the email. These are built-in validations. You can define date formats for validation, and you can also define the custom validations. So this one, I actually cheated a bit. So it's like using the standard pattern validation, and you get finally the field which is of type uploaded file. Get the content type of it and check if it matches PDF. So this one, in a similar case, is checking the length of the file and saying that this file should be not larger than 1 megabyte. These are really simple examples, but you can really implement classes for validation. You can define here a own class which implements the validation logic. I'm not sure you were at the demonstration before the lunch. I did it downstairs. I was showing the new Jahia site and server settings panels, which are actually most of them are based on the web flow, because the flows are really complex in some cases. I do not have the source code here, but I can at least show you maybe a couple of screens. So these are our new server settings. They are like all the Jahia edit mode rendered in a panel. You have some things like I guess the most complex one is the module management screen, which has also the overview, the details, and a bunch of actions for enabling, disabling the modules. Everything this is managed by web flows, and it was really easy to do it. So because the rendering behind is pretty straightforward, it's the same concept as Jahia views, and it took a bit of time to integrate the web flow, and especially to make it work smoothly with OSGI, because there are some particular concepts in web flow which are not maybe quite transparent. But at the end, just creating something now is really easy. So what can actually be done with it? Or what is reasonable to use it for? It's really when you need some flow-based processing. So it's not like you have a login screen, and if the user enters a wrong password, you need to display your login is wrong. For me, this is it's maybe a sample for the web flow, but it's not really a real-world scenario. So it's really complex flow, complex processing, forms, data, custom business logic behind, because you can integrate external services behind this. It's a Spring entry point. You can do pretty much what you need in this views. They are, of course, heavy. They need some processing because they keep the state, but it is really nice for such cases. So as a summary, we are really satisfied with the things we did, because it's actually helped us a lot, at least as a case for the Jahia site and server settings panels. It also answers a couple of questions from customers for this particular case. Of course, this is only the first iteration of integration. We have not touched the Ajax rendering in Webflow, so all the Webflow views could be based on Ajax rendering and Ajax actions. These are like non-Ajax actions. There are a couple of things like group validation, which we have not touched so far, but we would like to get a feedback to know where to proceed forward with this one. So this is all for my presentation. If you can have questions, I can answer. Actually, all the rendering for the Webflow are not cached. So because the rendering behind and the logic is really dynamic, there are not a lot of cases when this needs to be cached. So that's why I said it's heavy processing of the form data, which is. We tried at the beginning to find the cases when it seems reasonable to integrate with the cache, but then we ended up with cache fragments growing and growing because the number of combinations is really dramatic, and we said for now it's not cached. So far not. So far as the view mechanism behind the Webflow, we use GSP. So we have no need so far to use GSF, but maybe it could be useful. So out of the box, we have no integration for GSF. There are right now the site settings module and server settings, which you saw. These panels are most of the views are using the Webflow because they are complex. For example, in the previous demonstration, they showed the newsletter management panels. They are also using Webflow because you have creation of newsletter issues. You have this subscription manager, which is now in the Spring Webflow and not in the GWT. So far, I do not remember. There was a Bootstrap module example in the previous demonstration, which was using Spring Webflow for settings panel. It's mainly for such kind of things. Yeah. Good. I would like to thank you all. This was, I guess.